It's episode 304, and today we're going to be talking about advice for new players to EDH. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Max and Chris, how are you both doing this afternoon?
It is above 0 today, so I'm doing great.
I will take it.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, we're also recording this just as the stream goes live with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty spoilers, so I've caught a few of them literally in the last 3 minutes, but I'm going to have to go back and watch it after this.
Yeah. I know people were talking about it at the store. They're like, they're leaking so much stuff, and like, how are they, like, these leaks getting out and everything? And I've just been looking at people and be like, this is all part of Wizards' plot. They purposely leak it.
The fact that here in the year 2022, when everyone has a camera on their phone capable of recording a Hollywood quality film, and the only pictures we get look like they were taken by an amateur Bigfoot photographer in 1976. Like, I couldn't intentionally take a picture as bad as most of the leak pictures we've had in the last couple weeks. So I absolutely do sometimes wonder, Chris, if that isn't true, because I'm like, I don't know how you take that picture.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, they're going, what do they have, like pen cameras or something? And that's the same way I'm thinking of, like, technology nowadays. Even a pen camera is better than that.
I'm going to take a picture of these leaked cards. I better rub Vaseline on my phone lens first before I do anything. Like, that's what it looks like. I don't understand. So yes, no, I kind of buy that argument that it's set up for sure. But yeah, we got to see some cool stuff, so it'll be fun to go back through, and spoiler season has started back up, and I'm actually kind of ready for it. We had a nice break, and I'm kind of feeling energized and ready to go, so I'm ready to dig into it, and I'm sure we'll talk about it some in the next couple weeks. Did anyone get any fun games in this week? Chris got to play at least one game I saw at the shop this week.
Yeah, I sure did. And this is a stab at everybody who plays Koma, because Koma is the most stupid commander in the world. And if you play Koma, I will purposely target you off the field. I'm terribly sorry, but it will happen.
It was also just a bad match because you had borrowed my Veil of the Nightclad deck.
Yeah, and the deck played exactly how I thought it would, you know. Went right in sync. I was doing it everything like I should be, but, you know, the guy's playing Koma with vehicles. He's playing vehicles. So, you know,
so he had blockers for everything he did.
I don't get intimidated, and then I'm just looking at his board state, and he's looking at my board state, and I'm just like, well, this is just horrendous.
And you were both playing with a new player, too, or at least relatively new to Magic, which is kind of what inspired this a little bit, this show.
Yeah, the new player didn't quite go off, and then we were also playing with another player, listener of the show, Mike Albano. I'm not sure if I pronounced your last name right. If I butchered it, I'm terribly sorry. It happens.
That's why we always just say Dr. Mike. It's easier.
Yep. And they weren't doing anything. They were just sitting there watching us look at each other. So it was a really weird game.
And Max, I think you were pretty quiet this week, but you should get a bunch of games this weekend.
Correct.
I got to play at the shop this week. I actually borrowed Dr. Mike's snow deck and managed to get both Marillages out. The one off the Marilage off the land and the one off the enchantment. Of course, both immediately died. One was one was pathed and one was, I can't remember what happened to it, crib swap or something. But I got them both, so hey, good enough.
Wow. They let that happen? Seriously? What in the world?
And I will relay two stories that happened on stream this week. The first one was we were playing a game with Emma and Scott from the BM cast. So it was myself and Joey Schultz from Media Trek cast. And just talking trash and having a good time. And at one point, I went to remove Joey's commander. And Scott made Joey a deal and said, I will redirect that. I think he used a bolt bend to kill one of Dana's creatures if you let me get a free attack so I can get triggers next turn. I was like, yeah, that's fine. So my removal spell wound up killing my own Thada Adal. Like, oh, okay. Well, what do you do about that? So it came back around to me, and I top-decked a Howl from Beyond, which lets you buff a creature plus X+O. I also happen to have a Tainted Strike in hand, which gives a creature Infect. So I just left all my mana up and passed to Scott, and he swung at Joey, and per their agreement, Joey didn't block. So I buffed his commander up and hit it with Tainted Strike and infected Joey out. And it was, I thought, Max, you would have been proud of that scumbag move.
I am. Very, very well done, Dana.
And the second game, I was playing my Crash deck, and I had gotten knocked down to... I should have been killed. Joey was swinging with a bunch of tokens, and Scott killed one of the tokens to keep me alive. And when it came back around to Joey's turn, he cast Maw of the Obsidat, which is a generally kind of bad card from Gatecrash, or Dragon's Maze. But it lets you sacrifice a creature and buff all your creatures +1/+1 till end of turn. So he sacrificed like 7 tokens and gave all his guys +7/+7 and killed Scott, in part for saving me. Mind you, I'm sitting at 2 life this whole time. And I had Crash out.
Shocker that you're at 2 life.
Yeah, but Crash, all those tokens Joey sacrificed, buffed up Crash and turned him into, I think it was a 31. And I went to take lethal damage. He passed a turn. I went to take lethal damage from Emma, and I had 4 mana up, and the one card I had in my hand, Momentous Fall.
Oh no.
So I went from literally 1 life, and the only reason, because I kept the mana up. I'm like, well, maybe someone will swing at me for like with, a chump creature thinking they'll need to hit me for 1, and I can Momentous Fall, Crash, and gain 3 life, and it'll be enough to keep me alive for 1 more turn. But because Joey cast the Maw the Obsidian and turned Crash into a 31, I drew 31 cards and buffed myself up to a very savable life total. And that was at the end of Emma's turn, too. So it passed to me immediately, and in the grip of 31 cards, I had a Pelucranos that I was able to drop with 12 counters on it. I put a Dying Wish on it, which was one of the cards I drew. So that means when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to somebody. I berserked it and hit it with a fling. So I was able to kill Joey with the fling trigger and kill Emma with the Dying Wish trigger.
Wow.
And he even said, he's like, okay, I'll kill Scott because I don't think Dana's going to be able to come back at 1 life. Yes, I did. So never give up, I guess, was the lesson.
They kind of deserved that, I guess. I would have just turned on you in a heartbeat. I would have been like, this ain't happening.
Well, especially because it was only enabled by Joey sacrificing all his stuff. Like, I would have just gained 3 life and definitely died. So yeah, it was the Maw the Obsidian. I definitely then don't feel bad when someone else's attempt to win the game is the only reason you stay alive. So there we go. We had some crazy games this week, and I would bet Max and I have some fun stories next week because we're going to play a bunch EDH this weekend.
I will try to remember them all.
All right. Well, if you and Listener Land have some fun stories for us, how'd you go about letting us know, Chris?
Well, you can reach us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central. And you can also find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and check out our reward tiers, such as a Dexy Play episode or just joining our community to chat with us and play virtual EDH. And this week we want to say hello and welcome to Adam Kenny, Asher Boyer, and Matt Van Der Veen. Yeah, I think I got all those right.
Very good. Well, thank you all, and thanks for all our listeners and supporters. We do appreciate it. It does mean a lot. We actually, I went to send out new Patreon rewards, which are the Planeswalker cards that we had printed up last year, and we were out. We ran out of copies of those. So I had to get another batch ordered up, and those should be in the next week or 2. So yeah, thank you to all our supporters. We've had enough people that have been interested in helping this show out that we ran through our initial allotment of those custom Planeswalker cards and had to order more. So thank you everyone out there. We appreciate it. Okay, folks, should we jump into this show here?
Let's do it.
Chris mentioned playing with a new person named Matt this week. That's kind of what inspired that. That's a new employee at the shop, right, Chris?
Yes. Matt's been there since just before Christmas, I think it was. He kind of got thrown right into the fire because, like I said, 3 weeks ago, the store owner and I both caught COVID. So, like, we were cut down on employees and all that. So, being a new employee, he just kind of got thrown into the fire and seems to be doing really well since then. So,
now was it a Yu-Gi-Oh player initially?
No, he is actually a close friend of our other store owner, Savannah. So
okay, so he wasn't even like a card player at all. He's just somebody that you guys knew.
Yes. He moved up from Kansas, so.
Okay. I don't know why I thought Yu-Gi-Oh! And I don't know why Max thought that was so funny.
I don't know. I thought it was amusing.
Out of the blue, I think. There we go.
So this is brand new to him, then, learning to play card games like this.
Yes, he's into D&D and stuff like that, so he's not like new to like the fantasy aspect. But
sure.
The cards themselves, yes.
Well, and you guys were all being very patient and walking him through stuff. And then after that game, I played a game with him after that, or before the shop closed. And I don't think we got a chance to finish it because I think you guys it was like ridiculously cold that night. And everyone's like, we just need to get out of here before people's cars start freezing.
Stupid cold out.
Yeah. So I got to play a game with him too. And he was doing a good job following along, but it just made me, between you, listening to you guys talk to him and us play with him, it just made me, think of like, there's probably a lot of good bits of advice we've encountered over the years that would be useful to pass on to listeners when they wind up playing with a new player or have some new friend of theirs they want to introduce to the game, that kind of thing.
Yep.
So the first thing I will start off with here, when you're talking to a new player or helping them build that first deck or whatever, keep it simple. Now, I would also say keep it maybe not too simple. And what I mean by that is simple, one color decks are simple. You just are almost never mana screwed unless you just don't draw lands, but you don't find yourself in that position where you don't have the white mana to cast the 2-color commander you have or whatever. That never happens. But there's a lot more restrictions in a 1-color deck with things you just can't do. So I would say keep it simple in that don't try to give a new player or don't encourage them to play a 3 or 4 or 5 color deck, but maybe don't have them play a mono-color deck either, and maybe mono green. Mono green's pretty simple and does most of the things, but 2-color deck or maybe mono green. You want to keep it easy. You don't want them to be in a position where, because number one, new players tend to be playing on a budget anyway, so their mana base is probably not going to have as many dual lands as you normally encounter in people's decks. It's just easy to wind up in a bad place for mana, and don't put them in that position. Encourage them to build a 2-color deck, maybe mono green. So they have answers, they have all the cards they need. Everything is for the most part there in most 2-color pairings. And it's easy to have the mana they need to cast those spells, because just enjoying yourself is a big part of keeping people in the format, and sitting there unable to play is a good way for someone to not want to play anymore.
Agreed.
So my first step, there's that person who's watched people play and they've borrowed a deck and they kind of are looking to get into it, and they want to build their first EDH deck. I would say absolutely, if you're looking for to build it or just buy them a precon, start with a 2-color deck just for simplicity's sake. It's going to make everyone's life a lot easier. Max, do you have any particular advice here? We'll rotate over to you. I'm
going to kind of piggyback off of that. And my first piece of advice is start with a low amount of decks.
Yeah, yes.
This is also coming from the guy that has, 5 decks, maybe 6. So take this with a grain of salt. But, I've seen too many people that play their first game of EDH, love it, and go on this building spree and build 10 decks in a weekend. But if you don't know how to play the game, let alone build a deck, that's cool, but having fewer amount of decks means you can learn how the game works and also learn how those decks works, whether it's a couple precons and then you build your first 2-color deck or 1-color deck. But in my opinion, if you come into the game shop for the second time ever and you have 10 decks and you don't get 10 games in, you're going to get frustrated throughout the night that this deck didn't perform, so I'm going to switch, and this deck didn't perform. Well, maybe it's stick with 1 or 2 decks, learn how they work, learn how the game works, and then move on from that.
That is a really good piece of advice, I think, for sure. There's 25,000 cards in this format, and a lot of them are very complicated, and the interactions they have with one another are very complicated. And the way individual decks play is very complicated. You just need to minimize the amount of possible things one person has to keep in their brain. Because it's easy for people like us who've been playing for, 10 plus years. We routinely forget how stuff works or miss it, let alone a new player. It's just a lot to keep track of. So yeah, definitely don't just take it easy and take a deep breath and get those, build that deck, build a second one if you want, but get a feel for how those run before you just go crazy and start just brewing constantly, for sure. Chris, what's some advice you have here for newer players?
Well, we'll stay along the lines of, you're just talking about new decks and how cards work and everything like that. The biggest thing I can say is you need to teach them,
yeah.
A good way to, give an example of this is I have this little quote thing that I wrote down, don't be that OG Magic guy who's a jerk.
Yeah.
Be the guy who's going to be like, oh, well, okay, hold on now. Before you do that, you need to realize that this is how this is going to happen, and walk them through that instead of just being like, no, it doesn't work that way, and then stopping it right there. You need to help them to learn how the game is supposed to be played instead of just, slapping them in the face and be like, no, you're doing it wrong, you're dumb, all that stuff, because I've seen that so many times with players. And
yeah.
It's that's not how you teach. Not at all. You're going to force someone out of the game and they're not going to want to come back. So teach them how the game works, and then you'd be surprised because if they really enjoy it and they understand it, they'll come up with new stuff that'll teach you how things work.
Yeah, they'll see interactions or find cards that you just dismissed. Yes. That they just grabbed, and tried out and winds up being effective. But because you've been playing so long, it's easy for an entrenched player to sometimes miss those things.
Yes, I actually. So when you brought up this show, it was actually really cool because I actually played with 2 new players on Modern Monday as well. And I was playing Tron versus a guy who was playing Glimpse of Tomorrow combo. And he's a newer player, so I was very surprised that he was on a deck like this. Now, for those of you that don't know, Glimpse of Tomorrow is a sorcery that came out of Modern Horizons 2 that has Suspend. And when it comes off of suspend, you get to shuffle all your permanents you own into your library, reveal that many cards from top of your library, and then put all none or a permanent cards this way onto the battlefield. Then do all the same for aura cards and put the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. So he was cascading into this off of the green-blue Cascade creature that was just reprinted into Modern. And I had to stop him numerous times to say, okay, this is how the stack's going to resolve and how all these triggers are going to happen. Now you get to choose how you want to do this. And he'd start choosing. I'm like, no, stop. We're going to do it this way because this is where you're getting the most value out of these cards. And I was teaching him how to do his combo, even though he was completely obliterating me, which I really was not happy
right.
about. But I had to teach him so he understood how everything worked.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, that, I want to repeat that. That's just such a good point. Like getting a fresh set of eyeballs on stuff. You as a veteran player being willing to learn from a new player is really useful as well. And that goes both ways. The one thing talking about like not being the OG Magic player who, is disrespectful too, I would say also maybe keep it simple in terms of explaining the rules, like when you're at that point with a new player where you're talking about how the game works even, because it's one thing to understand how to play. Oh, I basically get how to cast spells, all these kind of things. It's another thing to get the interactions. Like the game is so insanely complicated. And one of the things I've found it's useful to tell newer players when you're, playing the game and teaching them something is, that here's how this works. It doesn't quite work this way. You can only cast things. I'm trying to think of an example. Yeah, when you kill something, it goes to the graveyard and then you can, maybe reanimate it or bring it back later on. So like if you see me put something in my graveyard, it's not necessarily always gone. And they say, okay, all right, so that's where it's like your discard pile. I'm like, yeah, sure. Except for like exile means it's gone from the game for good. So like something can go in your graveyard and they can still come back, but once it's exiled, it's gone. Okay, well, that makes sense. Unless it's not gone. Because something exiled, there are a few cards in the game that bring things back from exile. And I always say, like, for every rule in the game, there's almost always something that breaks that rule.
Yep.
So it's useful to point that out. You don't want to say absolutely, like, when this happens, the thing is gone for good, because then that's confusing when they see the exception to that does crop up. But also, you don't need to explain all those exceptions. You can just say, yep, when it's exiled, it's gone. Yes, there are a few cards that might one day bring it back, but we will deal with that when the time comes. So, like, tell them the exception. Say, just so you know, for every rule, there's something that breaks it. But then don't go into too much detail about what those rules are that break it, because that's just too much.
You're going to make their head explode.
Yeah. So, like, don't, give people too little information and set expectations that will get broken later. Let them understand that, over the course of playing this game, the complexity is going to come out and you're going to see workarounds for every single thing. Hey, you can counter this spell, but maybe your spell is uncounterable, but maybe you're not going to counter it. You're going to exile the spell off the stack, and that gets around being uncounterable and whatever. Like there's a bunch of those interactions where every rule or every situation where you think you're safe, you're actually not safe. But you don't need to go into the specifics of them all. You will just deal with it when the time comes. But let them know to be ready that like you're going to find cards that work around things in weird ways. So once people understand that, similarly like the thing where you say, damage is loss of life, but loss of life isn't damage.
That is probably the most confusing thing for players.
Yeah.
I've had so many of those questions come up on our EDH nights where they bring up a card and they're like, how does interaction work? And I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh, this is one of those life loss versus damage interactions. Oh, great.
Yeah, right.
Here we go.
Or a difference between an activated and triggered ability. Or like there's just a trillion of them.
Yep.
And there's just no need to throw that at a new player until they're in the point in the game where it's happening.
Yes.
Because it'll just make their brain melt. That's no good for anybody. So yeah, bear that in mind, like explain stuff to people, but just be cautious you don't throw too much at them because it's easy to forget, particularly for people like us, when the format was smaller and people were all kind of maybe learning a little bit at the same time. We had a much less steep learning curve too.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of people are playing bad decks. It was just much easier to like transition into Commander 7 years ago than it is today. So yeah, try to remember that when you're talking to people as well. Max, what else do you have here?
My next one is going to be vocal about being a new player. I know for me this is hard because I'm a very introverted person, but like if you're new, say you're new because most people at your LGS are going to be more than happy to play with you, play a lower powered deck, help you understand what's going on, and because it helps grow the shop, it helps grow that community that you're in. They'll answer your questions and explain stuff, pretty much what you guys just said. But I think the key part is, taking that step, saying, hey, this is my second game ever, or my first time ever playing EDH, or I've only been playing for a week. Because we've been playing for years and we still screw up stuff all the time. So admitting you've only been playing for a short time is not embarrassing. So just be vocal about it. And like I said, most people are more than happy to play with you and help you out and teach you about this game.
That doesn't work for me, though. I've tried that numerous times. Like, people are like, you want to come play a game? I'm like, I don't know how to play Commander. I don't know anything about Magic. And they're like, shush. And I'm like, what? I don't know anything.
I'm a new player.
It's because your cover's blown, Chris. Go to a different shop in like 400 miles another direction.
I have 100% heard Chris say that before.
Hey, are you that guy from that podcast? No, it's those two down there. I don't know who they are.
Go play with them, yeah. How about you, Chris?
What are some other good ones I have on here? Let's see. So, I guess I want to stick along the lines of teaching right now. And a big thing is, I think that we need to teach new players, everyone out there, teach them the mulligan system of the game. It's probably one of the most complicated things that I've seen people not understand and not realize that it is probably the most valuable part of the game. For instance, this is what brought this up is when I was thinking back to my game on Tuesday with Matt, was he was stuck on 3 lands the entire game. And I think if he would have mulliganed his hand to something better, whether it would have been a piece of card draw in the hand or some ramp or something, the deck would have played better for him. But instead, you see an opening hand with, I don't know if he had all 3 in his opening hand, but you say it was 2 lands, and a spell to cast, everyone thinks, okay, that's perfect. Well, if you don't have anything else going on aside from that, then you're playing to the mercy of RNG. And that's where you don't want to be playing. So I think that's something that we need to start teaching new players is mulligans, because I've been trying this with people in Modern, because I see them like, oh, I'll keep this, and then we'll play, and I'm like, why did you keep that? You should have mulliganed that, I mean, even if it was a worse hand, you get another mulligan after that. Try to get the best possible hand so you can actually play the game.
Yeah, I think there's that thing with newer players where even if they know the mulligan exists, they get that hand that's okay. Yes, yeah, maybe. And they're like, okay, well, I don't want to take a mulligan and risk getting something worse. So they don't. One thing I almost always tell new players when you're playing in a game with them is I always say, just mulligan until you have a playable hand. And don't take less cards. Just take 7, and if you have to draw 4 times to get a playable 7, I'd rather have a new player have a playable 7, and then, eventually maybe they need to tweak their deck to figure out why they keep having the mull so far down. But I would still rather have them be able to play and get reps in and do that kind of thing than I would have them just be stuck with a 3-lander.
Yes. That's another thing I can teach people too is, this is something I've been trying to get, in the head of quite a few of the newer Modern players as well, is pile shuffle your deck. I know with a 100-card deck, it is a huge annoyance to do it. Sure. But when you play a long game, all your cards start stacking up on top of each other, especially your land base. And when you go to shuffle, you just jam them all in one spot, so they all get clumped together. Yep. Now, people say this is cheating and all that, because like, oh, it's like mana weaving and all that good fun jazz and whatever. We're playing for fun anyways in Commander, so I don't want to hear any of that. But, in order to get a good opening hand or to have your cards spaced out, you kind of need to do something like that, or else you're going to shuffle for like 3 hours. So, I mean, it's something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, again, particularly with a new player, like my primary concern is just to have them have a good experience.
Yes.
And like, if I'm playing with somebody who's been playing for 10 years, they know how to shuffle, presumably, and they maybe don't need to be doing too much specific weird shuffling to get there.
Yep.
Then I might raise an eyebrow and wonder what they're doing. But like, particularly a new player, just make sure your stuff is, you don't have 15 lands in a row and like break it up. Just flip your cards over, take a look, make sure there's no clumps. If you want me to cut afterwards, I will cut so you feel more comfortable. Like, just take a look. Because that's another thing. It's difficult to learn how to shuffle correctly with a Commander deck. It's a whole different thing than shuffling a 60-card deck.
They are big, too. I mean, like I've seen people, who go to shuffle and they're like, the deck's just too big in my hand, so they have to shuffle half the deck. And I'm like,
right,
now you're only shuffling half, and then the other half which are actually combined in the cards, so...
Yeah, it winds up taking like 4 times as long because you basically have to break the deck in half and then shuffle each half and then break those halves and like combine them with one another into like 2 more halves again and do that a couple times.
Yep.
Like there's a lot more shuffling you have to do it correctly in Commander than there is in other formats. So yeah, no, that's definitely a good one. Like it's just all about, again, like a lot of these come down to just the player having a good experience as much as possible.
Yes.
So this is advice for a new player, and I guess it also kind of dovetails off Max talking about don't build a gazillion decks. The reality is, in a 100-card singleton format, the amount of time it takes you to figure out how your deck works is so many more games than it is for other formats.
Some of my decks, I don't even think I understand how they work completely yet.
Now, don't get me wrong. That's not to say there isn't a lot of complexity elsewhere. There's been entire books written about, like literally, there's been a book written about how to use Brainstorm. So I'm not saying other formats aren't complicated, but like learning the basic ins and outs of what your deck's outs and win conditions are in a 60-card format where you're running 4 of a whole lot of cards is just a much different thing.
Yes.
The last time I played Standard semi-seriously was Oath Shadows Standard, where I put a deck called Goggle Ramp that was using Pyromancer's Goggles. It was ramping stuff out, and the kill condition was basically like a direct damage spell I would copy. It was a Fall of the Titans, I believe.
Yeah, Fall
tended to be the
Titans,
win con of that deck.
Yeah, because you get to double it, yep.
Yeah. So basically, the rhythm of that deck, which I found, we played in a GP. I think all 3 of us played in that GP in Minneapolis for that Standard. But we went to Max's house the weekend before or something, and there was half a dozen of us there, and we just like rotated playing our decks against one another for 4 or 5 hours or whatever it was. I picked that deck up really, really quickly. Not that I didn't know the basics, but like once I started playing it, I'm like, oh, I want to, double my draw spells, my Tormenting Voice kind of thing with Goggles, so I can draw 4 cards instead of drawing 2. And I'm gonna lose a bunch of life, but eventually we'll get to the point in the game where I just one-shot somebody, even though I'm at like 2 or 3.
Yep.
That's how that deck played. And very quickly you figure out those rhythms. Over the course of those 4 or 5 hours of just playing it, I had it well enough that I was comfortable to go to a GP and win multiple matches in a GP. I didn't like day 2 or anything. I think I only won 4 games that day. It had been 3 even. But like, I never felt like I was just stumbling around blindly. And yes, for sure, had I put in 40 more hours on it, I would have been even better. But like, I knew the basics of how the deck played well enough to be comfortable to play it and feel like I was doing it just fine within just a few hours. That is just not how most Commander decks work. You just have to put in a lot more reps to really, truly like get the feel for that deck. And I think people sometimes don't realize that. They like think, I just brewed this deck, I'm good to go, I'm going to sit down and play a few games, and then they're like, oh man, it just fell on its face. I maybe need to make some wholesale changes now. I would not worry about making wholesale changes until you get like 10, 12 games in with the deck. It just takes a long time to even figure out how they play, and even that might not be enough. You just have to be patient and play the deck a ton. Because with 100 different cards, the amount of interaction and the amount of choices you have to make, and I mean, there's just so many more variables than there are in most other formats that you just got to be patient and give it time.
Yes.
In what deck did you play when we were doing that, Max?
I was playing Collected Company.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah, the
and it was,
black-green version or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
Enchantment.
And you were in that one as well, Chris, right?
Yeah, I was playing Eldrazi, the red-green Eldrazi.
Yeah. It was just one of those things where like everyone, was comfortable enough to go play. But in Commander, it just like there's so many decks in mine too where it's you'll sit down and play the deck for a weekend or a couple games, and it doesn't feel right, and then so you don't play it for a week and bring it back 2 weeks later. It all of a sudden works. It didn't not work before. There's just so much variance. You just have to play it a lot, and your perception of it, that first bad game can like color in your brain. You just had a bad draw, or whatever it is. And it's just like, it just happens. Just be patient. So that's my next one. Max, what do you have for another piece of advice here?
I'm going to talk about online resources.
Yeah.
Specifically, so like we have EDH Rec. That's great. It's a great site for deck building, whether you're just starting and taking that average list of the commander you want to build, or maybe you homebrewed your own thing and you're trying to find cards you may have missed for the specific strategy you're building for that commander. That's great. There are tons of articles out there on like commandersherald.com and Card Kingdom. Tons of writers out there writing articles. My advice though to new players would be cautious of Twitter and Reddit. There are great personalities in both of those domains that you can go and follow on, whatever Twitter timeline or your subreddit. But there are also, Pub Stomper 69 and, Noob Master 12 out there that probably are going to tell you how to win the fastest and most complicated way. And you probably don't want to follow those type of people when you're new to the game, unless you just want a good laugh.
Sure. It's also easy to, on Twitter, just give bad advice because it's such a fast and simple, your character limited, which means you tend to not put that much thought into it. People just say dumb stuff about cards all the time because they just dash it off, move on to the next thing. And people forget they said it in the first place because it happens on Twitter so quickly and everything moves so fast. I do definitely agree with that. Like, if you're looking for card evaluations, particularly for new cards, for example, or whatever, the best sources are the ones that are more deliberative, like people that have taken the time to write an article. When you go to established websites, whether it's, EDH Rec or Star City Games or Card Kingdom or whatever, the places that have articles, going back through and be like, well, what did Sheldon Menery write about this card is way more useful than what, like I said, what Noob Master 69 said about it on Twitter. Someone that's getting paid to write about it and has a reputation on the line and has stopped and put thought into it and had someone go over their thoughts, an editor that's gone over it and thought about it, that kind of stuff tends to be what my go-to is. And even when I'm writing about cards, like I do card evaluation stuff when new sets come out for EDH Rec or for Commander's Herald pretty frequently. One of the first things I do when I look at a card is I write my paragraph blurb about this new card that I'm previewing. So I write my thing, and then I will go back and look up to see if anyone who I know is a smart person has talked about it, to see what I missed or what they said about it. And I don't always change my opinion. Sometimes I'll read something and be like, no, I think this is actually a good card, or no, I think this is actually bad. But sometimes you read something like, oh, shoot, I missed that interaction. I wasn't thinking of how this thing worked with this thing. Or even dumb stuff. You just read things. Sometimes you're like, oh, for some reason, I didn't notice that also hit creatures or whatever. Like that happens too, where your brain just skips over a chunk of text somehow, and you'll write about it for 5 minutes or think about it, and you get it like in your brain that it works one way and it just doesn't. And getting a refresher on that is useful too. Like just reading from smart people or getting information from smart people is a really useful skill to have in life in general, picking where you get your advice from, let alone Magic.
Yeah, stay off of Reddit. Please just stay off of Reddit.
Well, it depends on the sub too. Like there's some Reddit subs where like I that aren't bad, and there are some that are tragic. So I guess it depends. Reddit in general is a pretty dangerous place for the most part. But yeah,
whenever I Google anything and something pops up and it's from Reddit, I just skip right by it. And I'm like, nope, not going there. We'll go somewhere else.
Thank you.
I mean, I use Reddit for other like video games. I use Reddit for that. I don't use it for Magic, or rarely use it for Magic, because of my past experiences of finding the bad subreddits versus the good ones.
I get it. All right, Chris, what else do you have here?
Let's go towards the end of a game. So we're playing a game with a new player, and, it's been going on for a while, and we're all having a good time. And I just want to tell everyone out there, don't be afraid to crush them. Don't be afraid to win that game, to, defeat your opponents. That's what needs to be done. But you need to do it with class. And what I mean by this is when you win, don't be, like I said earlier, the OG Magic guy who's a massive jerk. You win, but go back through how you won with that new player, or show them where they missed something that allowed you to win. That's what I want to see is, I want you to teach these new players, like, okay, you missed this one interaction right here, which then gave me an opening to come through and just nuke you out type of thing.
Like a post-game kind of talk.
Yes. And, don't be, that OG guy afterwards neither, like, oh yeah, you should have done this, should have done that, that's what I would have done, blah, 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 blah. No, don't do that. Just be like, okay, this is where you missed out on this, so for next time, think about that, I was sitting here, like a big example I do is I always threaten that I have Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile. Always threaten it.
Sure.
I'm going to be completely honest with you. 90% of the time I don't have it. 90% of the time I don't. But I always threaten it. Well, that's something you can teach them. It's like, I had this one on white mana open, or I had 7 mana open and I was playing blue. And, I'm bluffing that I have, the Cyclonic Rift or the Swords. But, you played into it. So I did have it this time, but sometimes you don't have it, like little things like that they could have missed, and help them to understand, weird interactions of that nature.
That's a good example where you need to for sure know your audience. Like if you're teaching your friend how to play, they're going to be way more open to you saying, hey, so here's the thing that you could have done that would have saved you there.
Yes.
Versus playing with like a stranger who definitely might not, or is going to be perhaps less receptive to that because like, I didn't ask, I don't know who you are. So yeah, for sure. That's one where you need to know who the audience is that you're talking to.
Agreed. Yeah, because I had something similar to happen on Modern Monday with that. I was playing against a newer player who's playing Affinity, and I had an Oblivion Stone out, and he activated his Urza Saga to throw a token into the battlefield, and then activated it again to throw another token into the battlefield, which, cost him whatever the 3 mana or whatever it was, and then played right into my O-Stone. So I completely wiped out his board, and he was tapped out. He couldn't do anything. And I told him, after the game, I was like, if you wouldn't have activated, that would have left you 2 extra mana up. So then you attack in, force me to have to crack the O-Stone. You had 2 mana open to then rebuild afterwards. Instead, you tapped yourself out and played right into it where you left yourself wide open for me to build up ahead of you where you couldn't get back over it. And he was really thankful that I showed that out to him, that I was pointing out those little key mistakes that he made. I'm like, it could have made a difference in the game. It might not have, I don't know. But that was just something that, to go back on and think about.
Yeah, no, definitely. Kind of similar to that, or kind of dovetailing off that, I've got one that I would say, just watch and learn from other people. And this is as a new player, if you are the new player, pay attention to what other people are doing. Because it's not just about playing the game necessarily, particularly when you're new. Seeing things that are happening is going to teach you ways to play the game and teach you rhythms that are easy to miss. And the example, I guess, that's popping into my head here is the other night when I was playing, and I had a situation where somebody had a clearly much better board state than mine. And I think it was an Angel of Invention in play that has a lifelink. But like the person that I wound up attacking had multiple 4/4, 5/5 flyers, whatever. And I had my Angel was a 3/3, I think. I swung at them with my Angel. And the person was like, okay, I'm going to take it. Because they're like, well, clearly why would I be suiciding my Angel into their larger blockers? They would rather take the 3 damage than risk me, having a destroy target blocking creature or whatever spell it was.
Yep.
And there was a third player there. I was like, oh, here comes the board wipe. Second main phase, I board wiped. Because I'm like, why not gain 3 life before I did it, right? But
yes.
When you are, as a veteran player, that's something you learn. We've all had those moments where someone makes that play and you're like, oh, I know what's coming now. Because that what appears to be a dumb play is just a dumb play when you don't consider what's going to happen next. And that's the kind of thing you learn. When you start playing, those things just pop up. And as if you're there, in that 3-player interaction, if you're the 4th player and you're relatively new and you're like, why did that just happen? And ask the question then too, how did you know a board wipe was coming? If you're a new player, do not be afraid to ask, because someone will say, well, he can, why else would he have attacked with a creature that was going to die? If he's going to lose it anyway, why not gain 3 life?
Yep.
That's why the person attacked. So, oh, okay. And then there's those kind of things that you can just pick up from watching and learning and talking to other people in games. There's so many of those little interactions like that come up. And on a similar tip, particularly if you're someone who comes from another format, that's how you learn the differences between what cards are good in Commander and what cards are good in other formats, and where those two things might not necessarily overlap. Because they don't always overlap, right? Sometimes a card that, like Dark Confidant, even though we talked about it on our budget replacement, Dark Confidant is fine in EDH. It's crazy in other formats.
Yes. And
that's an easy thing to miss in just coming into the game until you watch people and kind of get a feel for it. An early on thing, I remember Eternal Witness being a card where Eternal Witness was in standard, and I guess I'm sure it got play, but it wasn't one of those cards like Grey Merchant of Asphodel or something where it changed the format.
No.
In Commander, Grey Merchant or Eternal Witness is a insanely powerful card in a gazillion decks.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you pay attention and watch, that doesn't necessarily translate. If you're building that deck, you don't necessarily get why that card is so good in Commander, because you're just used to perhaps it being an afterthought in other formats.
Yeah, that took a long time for me to even realize, I'll look at a card and it's 7 mana. This card's garbage.
Yeah.
Throw it in the fire, bulk card, throw these all away. And then you look at it, it's like, wait a minute, okay, so on this turn in Commander, if I'm doing this with this, it's like, oh, that card's broken. Okay, I see where we're going with this.
7-mana card in Commander is like turn 4 a lot of times. It's a whole different deal than it is some other formats for sure. Yeah, so that's something to definitely watch out for. It's just like pay attention to other people and just see what they're doing and both observe and ask questions. There's just a lot to be learned out there from the games you're playing. Max, do you have a final piece of advice here for new players or people that are teaching new players?
Yeah, I got one more, and it's about pet cards, a topic we've talked about multiple times in the past, and I'm going to use one of Dana's favorite cards, Psychic Possession, as my example, and this one is, the enchantment that you enchant a player, you skip your draw step, but then you draw every time the enchanted player draws. Is that correct, Dana?
Yes. So you skip your draw step whenever they draw any card.
You draw. Okay. The reason I'm using this is that card seems okay when you just read it as is. You skip your draw step, and then whenever the player you enchant draws a card, you draw a card. But there's a lot of strategy behind pet cards, especially this one, because when Dana plays that, he has to figure out between all of his opponents which deck is probably going to draw the most cards. Which deck, if he's playing against 3 Boros decks, well, good luck. But if he's playing against a Simic deck or, anything with blue in it, those are probably going to be his targets versus, enchanting the Boros player or the mono white player. So when people say, yeah, this is a pet card of mine, it could be because they like the art, or the artist, or just, it was the first rare they ever opened. But it could also be because a lot of people don't run that card and it's criminally underplayed and there's a lot of strategy behind it. So again, ask why that person runs that card and why they chose to play it that way, because you'll learn something. You just can't take Psychic Possession and put it in any blue deck, because as a new player, you don't know who should I enchant with this, what are going to be my best odds, unless you ask the table and they're nice enough and saying, yeah, I'm probably the best target for this, if you play that card.
Yeah, that's definitely something you need to pay attention to for sure in games like that. In Psychic Possession, too, I should mention, we did the show last week talking about budget replacements for things about Rhystic Study, and I love Psychic Possession, and for some reason I just didn't mention it. So that was one we could have easily have thrown out there for a budget replacement. Although even that one is up to I think $3 or $4 now.
Yep.
Dana, stop recommending cards. I told you this.
I guess.
Jeez Louise.
So how about you, Chris? You got a last one here for us?
Not really. I mean, I could go off of what I was saying about, with beating them, because you could also just lose to them, and that's another good teaching outlet, is allowing them to win the game. And I'm not saying, throwing the game per se, but if you see that they have a clear-cut win, walk them through it. Don't keep your mouth shut, stop what you're doing, and you look down and okay, so they're going to attack this player, and you look at me like, no, you should attack me, or you should attack them. Because if you do that, then this is going to happen, which then forces this to happen, and then forces this to happen, and then that just wins you the game type of thing. Show what they're missing so they understand what it is, and then maybe that'll help them, in the long run, to actually have more of a broader outlook on the game instead of being so narrow-mindedly focused.
Yeah, for sure. And, you said don't throw the game. If you're playing with a new player, no, I'll say this. Don't let a new player know you're throwing the game. Don't say you did it.
Yes.
But, absolutely, if they go to make that game-winning play and you're holding, a negate in hand and you could stop it, don't cast a negate. Sometimes, particularly if somebody who's brand new, let them take that win. Don't make it obvious you're doing that, because that's not helpful either and can be outright insulting. But sometimes it's okay to just I'm just going to fold this hand. I'm just going to say, yep, nope, you got me. I got nothing. And let them have that win. You taking that loss right there sometimes gets their excitement and gets that hook in them sometimes too, where it's almost an investment. You're yeah, I could have maybe taken that game, but I didn't, and now this player is somebody who's now hooked for life.
Yeah,
and it's gonna play 100 fun games with you down the road. So yeah, no, I agree with all that, and I would say even sometimes maybe it's okay to just lose a game on purpose, particularly against a new player. Yeah. Just don't be a jerk about it. But I've absolutely done it before.
Yep. On those along those lines, when you're talking about negate and all that, another thing that popped in my head is when you are being targeted off of a board, or if you are targeting someone off of the board, and everyone starts complaining about why are you targeting me? What am I doing? Hippity hoop blah, everyone does it. Explain to the new player why that's happening, be the bigger man about it. If it's you, complain about it like we all do, but then explain to them why that's happening. I've seen that with a couple of new players where they're like, why am I being targeted? And if you explain it to them, For instance, one of the guys I was playing with, he had a birthing pod and a that 4-mana red enchantment that lets you cheat a creature into play and stuff like that. I can't think of the name of it.
Sneak attack?
Yeah, sneak attack. And I was explaining to him, like, because of your board state, I'm like, so you do this, and then you do this, you sneak attack, and then you sack it off with birthing pod, you go for this, and he's like, oh, I'm like, yeah, of course I'm going to target you off the field. Just because you don't see that, I see what's about to happen, and once you do figure it out, there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm trying to prevent this now. And if you can explain that to them, then maybe, then they'll be like, okay, I see what's going on type of thing.
Well, and the other thing I'll say about that, too, when you're feeling like you're being targeted, just because you feel like they're making a bad threat assessment and targeting you unnecessarily doesn't mean they are, in fact, making bad threat assessments. You don't know what's in their hand.
Yes.
Or you know what their plan is. And there are absolutely situations where, like, I've made calls in games that look really weird and questionable, but I also know that in my hand, I have a way to deal with the person that appears to be the threat, and I don't have a way to deal with your thing. So I'm going to remove your thing, knowing that I can stop the other person whenever. And it looks bad, but, like, you don't know what I'm holding and why I made that decision. So, like, don't assume, and same goes for me, I shouldn't assume someone else made a bad decision either, because I don't know what they've got going on.
Yeah. A good example of this is I played a while back with a listener of the show, Kyle, and he had Laboratory Maniac out on the battlefield, and I'm playing my mill deck. And the other player has, all creatures just coming through, beating face and everything. And I'm just targeting him and ignoring her completely. Kyle didn't complain or anything because he knew why.
Sure.
But she didn't understand why, I was targeting him when all he had was just that going on. It's like, well, I need to mill to win, and that card right there just says I can't win because he's going to draw a card and win the game that way. And she's like,
your win condition is also his win condition.
Yeah, I'm like, so I have to target him off because he's the threat to me more than you are the threat to me. So, I mean, those little things, you got to explain those to new players as well.
Exactly, because a new player's not going to catch any of that.
No.
I mean, veteran players don't sometimes, but like definitely it's tough for a new player for sure.
Oh, Kyle knew right away because he was laughing the whole time. Just like, ha, look what I got. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
Exactly. All right. I think that is going to wrap up Commander Central, episode 304. Hopefully that was useful for any new players out there listening, or at least people who are listening who are trying to get a friend or somebody into the game, or just encountering a new player out in the wild or at their shop. Because, like I said, it is kind of an investment that the extra time you put in with a new player oftentimes is going to reap you rewards down the road of just, having one more person who's a lot of fun to play with. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find them on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next week with a new show. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.